So Kurt, Jason, thank you both for joining me today. I'm excited to pick your brains a little bit about Appgate and everything Zero Trust in terms of what's going on in the space and how you guys are kind of viewing it at the moment. So to kick it off, Jason, if you maybe give me a bit of background on Appgate and a general description of Zero Security for those who might not be that familiar.
Appgate is a provider of a enterprise class Zero Trust platform. And what that means is that our customers, who are both enterprises and government agencies, have the ability to deploy a dynamic and context-sensitive access control model across their enterprise. And this is really important. You asked kind of what Zero Trust is. And what Zero Trust security is about unifying access control for identities and services across your very heterogeneous enterprise landscape and tying together, breaking down barriers between security and network silos that have existed for many, many years and resulted in very poor results from an enterprise security perspective, which is something that we live with all the time. Mm-hmm. Zero Trust lets organizations define a single access control policy model with the ability to enforce it across all of these different technology elements and user populations across the entire landscape.
Kurt, just to add on that, you and me have done a couple of podcasts together in the past, and you've been very good at kind of informing us about what's going on. But what are you finding interesting in the space at the moment in terms of what's jumping out at you that you really want people to kind of be aware of?
Yeah, sure. What I find very interesting today is that the number of technologies that an enterprise brings into their own environment is rapidly changing. Mm-hmm. And things like the cloud was already a big change, and now it's a containerized workloads, users working from home suddenly. So the changes are quite drastically and fundamentally different than before. And that new landscape gives a lot of threats and vulnerabilities to environments. And that's where Zero Trust actually plays, I think, an accelerator even for the business because of all these ongoing changes right now. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You talked about the threats that stem from this new technology, which absolutely is true and exists, but it's also tremendously beneficial, which is why they're adopting these new types of development and deployment technologies. And that's what's really exciting about Zero Trust is it lets organizations, lets the security teams enable the lines of business to achieve their core mission, utilizing these amazing new technologies in ways that are dynamic and high velocity not only without sacrificing security, but actually with transforming it to something that is much more resilient and much more robust than anything that we've had in the past.
I think that's a great point to make in terms of that evolution and how it's really being impactful of the business while not hindering the business as well. That's something that's always very clear to make when we're talking about Zero Trust. And there's an element as well that gets overlooked sometimes when we talk about compliance. It's a big concern for security professionals, business leaders in the space. It's something that they're really battling against, really trying to perfect, should we say. So how can Zero Trust help with those compliance-related challenges?
Yeah, the compliance, first of all, is to make sure that you have the right controls about your desktops, your laptops, your users, and if they're in place, only then they can be accessed. And what Zero Trust is actually, that is part of the core way of the model. So if you don't have those things in place, you will not be able to connect. So that already on its own drives a lot of compliance easiness because you can actually prove that if it's not a compliant standard machine you're working from or the user is not in the right group, mm-hmm. you will not have access. So that's the first thing I think that really makes Zero Trust, that exercise makes that so much easier. But the second thing is, with Zero Trust, we're trying to define the security rules on the network on a much higher layer, on the business layer. And by using the business layer, saying, hey, you can only access if you have the right tags around your application or if you have an open ticket for it, those things also drives compliance because compliance are typically, I can only access finance people to finance applications, and that is exactly what we're doing as well with the Zero Trust model we're leveraging in Appgate. Mm-hmm. And that makes it easier for compliance teams to deal with that. And then the last part of it, which is also a challenge, is that some of these workloads only live like for minutes or an hour or so. They spin up and then they get destroyed again. And if someone accesses those elements in the meantime, you will still have proof, but you don't have any change control or firewall rules. It's actually completely dynamic. And the moment the user has access, we still can show all the evidence that the posture was okay, which users have accessed, from which device did they do. So it gives a lot of invisibility as well from that perspective, and the rules are not changing, so there is no controls around controls for firewall rules or whatever that's or necessary anymore. Yeah. It's actually the higher level that it's by design a lot more natural, close to what the compliance rules are in this case. Yeah.
Excellent. Perfect.
One of the nice things about some of the business processes that you alluded to is that with a zero trust system, when it's tied into things like a help desk request or the tags on the workloads that you mentioned, is that it becomes self-documenting. And no one loves compliance documentation or compliance auditing. And by using a zero trust system that ties into the business process or the metadata, it becomes completely self-documenting, and it ensures, number one, that the organization remains compliant, and number two, that you have proof for the auditors. And it's really win-win-win, because the users don't have to do anything special, there's no friction, and it just happens automatically as part of your development or deployment pipeline or your business processes. And that's the beauty of Zero Trust, of its integratability across not only technologies, not only security and IT technologies, but business technologies and business applications as well.
There's important distinctions to make, and very important for all organizations to see that on that step of that journey. And to kind of wrap up here, it's curious to see, last year there was a lot of conversations around Zero Trust. There was a lot of podcast discussions from my side, and I'm sure you guys were having great discussions as well. And I'm curious to see what those next steps are for not only the development, but the implementation of Zero Trust across organizations.
Yeah, so the next steps, I think, is just applying it to more workloads. I think people start using it first with user access and or even as a VPN replacement, and then they suddenly see like, oh, I have these special workloads in the cloud that need to connect something. Maybe I can also use a Zero Trust on the workload to workload elements, or I can do it from a container to an external service. And that's all the expansion we see today, are customers using it first for user access or simple even a VPN replacement, and then they see the journey going from even their IoT devices and all of their server workloads to see where specific elements, where a firewall rule or an extension of the network doesn't make sense. This actually is a perfect fit for them to a natural extent the same framework and leverage that to become even Zero Trust beyond the user access only in this case.
Yeah, I think that's one of the types of progressions that we often see customers take is they'll start off with either a basic use case that's very focused, like VPN replacement, as you mentioned, or taking a focused team for a cloud migration project, and then they grow it from there. And I think a well-run and successful Zero Trust program will not only expand the use cases and the groups of users, but also expand and build on its integrations into other elements. So every Zero Trust system needs to tie into an enterprise identity system for authentication and some basic user context. But as organizations kind of do that as step one, oftentimes step two is tying that to a more real-time system and getting maybe risk levels from an endpoint management system, or getting alerts or things from a SIEM, or tying it to a service desk for access request, or an identity governance system. There's so much infrastructure and process and technology that's in place that Zero Trust actually helps organizations get more value out of. So that's, I think, if you think of a concentric rings, as they go to step two and step three, they're really expanding the scope and the value and getting more value out of things they've already invested in.
I think it's an exciting space, and seeing how the growth is going to be coming over the next couple of years is going to be fantastic. So all I can say is thank you both for coming on today, giving us your insights and walking us through this process. Thank you both.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.